Hello, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the 7th annual gathering of the Next Practice Institute. My name is Bernardus Holtrop. I'm a principal of Mobius. I oversee many of the Winning from Within leadership programs, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here. The QR code will point you to many more great things to learn about Mobius, about NPI, the Next Practice Institute, and this annual gathering. And I now have the honor to introduce Owen Eastwood. So I just met Owen, and let me first say, what a wonderful human being. So let me give you a little background about him. He will also share some of this. So over the past decade, Owen Eastwood has worked with some of the most elite teams and groups in the world, including the England football team, the command group of NATO, the South African cricket team, corporate leadership teams, elite ballet, and the British Olympic team. So he is a performance coach of teams. And as a performance coach and the author of the international bestseller Belonging, the ancient code of togetherness, Owen coaches leaders on building healthy, high-performing team and organizational culture. A New Zealander now living in the UK, Owen invokes ancient wisdom and ritual from his own cultural identity to connect individuals to a higher cause, each other and their role in the team. He works with the European Ryder Cup team, Chelsea Football Club, the Bangalore Cricket Club in India, and corporate leadership teams in the UK and the US. Also, you can read an excerpt of his stunning book in the current edition of the Mobius strip. That is also available to you, and that was part of your welcome package. So, we are so delighted to have Owen here. I was so delighted to meet him just now. Owen, over to you.
Thank you so much for your very kind introduction, and it's a real honour to be here, and I fully respect and see this is quite a sacred gathering. I've just observed that over the last half hour or so, and I'm quite humbled to be here. So let me introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Owen Eastwood. I'm a New Zealander, big part of my identity, although I've lived in the United Kingdom for most of the last 20 years. I was a lawyer. That's what I trained as. I practiced law for 15 years. I was a partner in a London law firm. I was very happy. And then had a completely accidental transition to become a performance coach. And I think a lot of people in the room would probably relate to this story of how you become a coach. As an employment lawyer, you're into the weeds on workplace issues every day. If your client respects you, you over time become a trusted advisor, I suppose. They start talking about things beyond just the legal question, getting your counsel. And often they would talk about team dynamics and leadership challenges and things like this. And I'm just nosy. So I would be very happy to give my point of view on what they were exploring. And then quite a few of my clients were actually were high-profile sports teams. And then one day a coach just said, I think that would sound really good from you to the team. Would you like to come in and coach? And I don't need to explain the imposter syndrome and the complete fear of that experience, but I am very grateful that I managed to find the courage to do that and really this wonderful journey as a performance coach. So my focus is on two things. One is competitive strategy, just making sure we've got one is a starting point. And secondly, the team culture and really designing and engineering that very specifically. So, yes, it was in my introduction. The point here is there's a diversity of environments. And by the way, if it's not obvious already, I'm completely unqualified for what I do. Trained as a lawyer, I've never done one session or seminar on psychology or anything sensible. So really what I've learned is mainly informed both by experience, but also the way that I was brought up, which I want to share with you. So all that is absolutely fantastic, isn't it? It's nice to have a nice CV. My mum is very proud of me. But I'm actually going to invite you to disregard that. because every single person who's come into this room this morning, you can really only understand the way they are, the way they coach, if you know a bit about their story. And I believe that I need to do that with you to get any form of trust in what I have to say. So let's just ignore that, and let's actually connect as humans. So I was brought up in the South Island of New Zealand, and in fact, we were brought up in the southernmost part of the South Island of New Zealand. So where I grew up, there was one island between us and the Antarctic. So yes, weather like this is quite familiar. But I grew up beside this river. My mother is 88. Her whole life has been spent. She was born in a farmhouse under that mountain, and now she lives at the other end of the river. I've ventured a little bit further than that. But that's our place of belonging. That is a sacred place. I have not lived there since I was 18. I'm 56 now. I feel it every single day. It gives me strength that I belong in that place. And this is a photo that was taken when I was 5. So I'm the little dude wearing the yellow hat. And this photo has definitely, to say it has mixed emotions would be an understatement. So this is my mother and my father, my 2 older brothers who were 12 and 10, and my little sister who was 3. And shortly after that photo was taken, my father died very suddenly. So my mother, 39 years of age, becomes a widow with these 4 children. And I don't really need to talk about trauma and grief to you. It's an experience we've all had. But what definitely happened to me over time was that my father was an only child, and he was half English. His own father had fought in the First World War and wanted to get the hell out of Europe and came all the way to New Zealand to start a new life. And he married a Maori woman, married the indigenous people of New Zealand. So my father was half Maori and half English. And as I grew from 5 when he passed to become a teenager, it was interesting. My siblings seemed to create their own identity story that they were able to operate quite effectively through life with, but I wasn't. My mother was one of 8 children. We were surrounded by people all the time, but I had this inherent sense of loneliness and feeling like an outsider. Sometimes the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team would play on TV, and if you've ever seen them, they do a war dance haka before. And New Zealanders love that, but for me it was a signal that actually there's a culture there that's powerful, but you don't belong there. You should belong there, but you don't. And so all of this sitting there, and it really, really got to me, and it affected my confidence, I think. So I was trying to curate an identity story, but there's just big holes in it. So what I did, which I'm very grateful that I did this, is when I was 12 years old, I wrote a letter to the Maori tribe. The Maori tribe is called Ngāi Tahu, and we are quite a large tribe in the South Island of New Zealand. And I wrote a letter, and I still quite can't believe I did this, but I wrote a letter to them, and I just said, my name is Owen Eastwood, my father was Harry Eastwood, and my grandmother lives 1,000 miles to the north, her name is Rose Eastwood. I believe they're members of your tribe, and I just want you to know if you know who I am. And they wrote this very beautiful letter back to me, which I still have, which said, and I will be a bit emotional all these years later, but they said, we know who you are and you belong here. And I still remember opening this letter and having this absolutely euphoric sense of finally being connected to something bigger than myself and belonging with this, what to me were an inspirational group of people. And as well as this letter where they just sent me that message, they also gave me a list of my ancestors going back 1,000 years. And that is just part of it. And that also was quite transformative because, again, I felt like I lost my father. I didn't feel connected to anything deep. All of a sudden, someone's putting their arm around you and say, my friend, you belong here, you belong with us. And by the way, you are part of an amazing story. And what was interesting, and I'll come back to it later, is that as part of this letter, which I still have, they identified 4 of my ancestors who they said, their story is our story, their trauma is your trauma, their resilience is our resilience, And of those 4 ancestors they mentioned, 3 of them were women. And growing up in New Zealand, in the 1980s, that wasn't actually a very normal type of way to communicate with a boy. It was a bit like Yellowstone type of culture I grew up in, very rural, very, very macho. And they also, and as a 12-year-old, a lot of this is probably just about going over my head, but they also explain this beautiful spiritual idea called wakapapa. Okay, and what they said to me is that every single community you belong to, and that includes your family, it includes your nation, includes your school. If you're in a team, it includes a team. Any community, it certainly includes this beautiful tribe here. Any community you feel part of, it has an origin story. It has our first founders. And there is a line of people with their arms locked together from there right through to the very end of time. And again, it's talking to this 12-year-old boy, just explaining, you need to understand your place in this world. Your father has passed, but your arms are locked together forever. And all that's happened is the sun has moved off from him. Now it's on you, and in time it'll reveal those who follow you. So you should take strength from that. And they then went on to say, and this is really why I want to share, this is my whole coaching philosophy. Again, they're explaining this to me that if you want to be a good human being, in our tribe's eyes, there's 3 things you need to do. The very first thing you need to do is you need to understand that when the sun moves down this line of people and reveals you, that you are a guardian for the collective. You're not the hero of the story. This is all about us. So what you need to do is you need to understand and inherit our story, our sense of purpose, our values, and the stories that they are wrapped in, the moments of pride and the moments of shame, the rituals and traditions that we have. You need to understand these and you need to live them when the sun is shining on you. So that's a profound act of guardianship is what we require from you to be respected in our tribe. And they made it really, really clear that you are not inheriting a fairy tale. There are parts of our story that we are very proud of, and other parts we're not. And so for every generation, when the sun moves upon them, you need to understand that you have to make an election. What are the things that you're going to take with you, and what are the things that need to be left behind? And you are empowered to do that. Then the second thing they said is, when the sun shines on you, my friend, you do not get to choose your moment in time. And weak leadership, weak guardianship of people who wish they were somewhere else or are in denial or put the shutters up and hope this moment passes and someone else can navigate it. So they said that when the sun shines on you, you need to step forward and be brave and have courage, and you need to meet the moment, and we need to do that together. And then finally they said that being a powerful and respected person of our tribe is that every single thing you do needs to lay the conditions for those who follow you to be successful. You do not have permission to do things which would be wonderful for you and short term for us, but will actually compromise those who are going to come after us. So you can sort of see, at a 12-year-old, I didn't think I was going to be a coach, but what an unbelievable letter that was. Should I put it like that? And I'm so incredibly grateful. And all of the work that I do is all based on that conception, really, of what it is to, first of all, be part of a community and belong to it, but also what it means when it's our moment to step up, when we're alive and when we're leading. And, one of the things that I really treasure is that 2 years ago I got a letter from the Boston Celtics NBA team, our local team, and I'm spending the day with them tomorrow, and I'm excited about that. And I've been collaborating with them for 2 years. And they wrote this letter, which I've got in my office, and it's so beautiful. It said that we've just finished reading Belonging, We had never heard of the Maori word wakapapa, but it captures our sense of our identity and our culture perfectly. Can we talk? So the point I'm making there really is that these are universal ideas. Yes, my culture, my tribe have wrapped them in a beautiful way, and they have transitioned it through generation upon generation, and I'm very grateful for that, but these are universal ideas, aren't they? Now I want to talk about my grandmother 5 generations ago. Her name is Pakanui. And she is remembered 200 years later as this beautiful, charismatic matriarch of not only our family, but our tribe. Okay? But you can only really understand the power of her if you understand her life. And I know one of the principles that guides you in your work is around trauma, the recognition of it, the excavation of it, the converting it into positivity, I suppose, maybe I can put it that way. And this is exactly what my tribe did with me. Again, they told me about it when I was 12. So they explained in this incredibly matter-of-fact way. They said, one of your ancestors that you really need to understand is Pakanui, your grandmother 5 generations ago. And then they just, without any great commentary, just listed these things about her life. When she was 6 years old, in 1832, a northern tribe came from the North Island and massacred their village one morning. And of the 1,000 people that were in her village, 600 were killed that morning. Some old people managed to get the really young ones like her, and they got out through the wall of the village at the back, across some swamps into the woodland, and saved them. After that, they had to travel 200-300 miles south in order to find a new home. That had been their home for 1,000 years. They lost it. When she was 12 years old, measles came into New Zealand through European colonisers. In that 1 year that measles was introduced, 1/3 of all the Maori people were killed by it, or died by it. She survived. When she was 15, the European whalers came from Northern Europe and created bases and whaled, obviously. She was raped and impregnated by one when she was 15. And then the same thing happened the following year. And when she was 18, the new land that they had created another home in was confiscated by the colonial government to give it to British settlers to farm on. And they were told to go, even though their ancestors were buried there and all their seasonal hunting was located there. When she was 19, she was baptised by the missionaries, and in his own words, which I've seen in his diary, she was baptised with fire, which leaves a bit of a brooding idea. But what she was told was that all of your gods and goddesses that you've been taught of are false. There is only one God. All of your rituals and traditions are wrong. You should not speak that language anymore. And in fact, your children will be punished if they're heard speaking anything other than English. And all of these events happened to her by the time she was 20. Yet, somehow, through all of this trauma, this positive, optimistic, charismatic woman emerged. She married actually a British settler. They had 8 children. And 200 years later, I'm in Cape Cod talking to you about her. Her influence continues. And I'm going to give you a very raw example of how it continues. This is a photo of my daughter, Livy. She's 11. And just before this photo was taken, in fact, the week before this photo is, she loves playing the clarinet. She's pretty good at it too. That's our local church. We just live in a small village in the Cotswolds in England, and she's playing that. But the weekend before she had this concert in the village, I sat her down and told her the story of Pakanui, because that's what we do, is that we pass these stories on. And what I said to her was that as your dad, I would absolutely do anything I possibly could for you to avoid suffering and pain. But I'm not going to be able to do that. So You're going to have an amazing life. We're going to have a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of adventure, but there's going to be a lot of pain, and there's going to be suffering along the way. I just want you to understand that you are a strong person, and you are a resilient person, and that's something that we've all inherited. So I told her the story of Pakanui, straight. I didn't dilute it. I just told her the story, and she understood that, and she understood that strength and that resilience is something that's passed down that line of people. And then a couple of days later, she has this performance at our local church, and I'm not musical at all, but I can hear her beautiful music. And anyway, as you are as a parent, you're so attentive to your children, aren't you? I could see that just as she gets to the end of this, it was a Harry Potter theme song, I think. Just as he gets to the end of it, I could see by her eyes and her body language she was upset. She was still finishing it, but I could see that she'd obviously missed something and she wasn't very happy. And then when she did finish, everyone gave her a massive clap. My wife, who was musical, just nudged me and said she didn't quite nail that one. And I said, oh, I didn't notice. I thought it was great. But then as my daughter goes to sit down on one of the pews, I can just see her body language, and I'm going, oh, my God. And I'm having a little parental panic attack of my own because I can see she's upset. And then I see it, and then I can just see the lip wobble. And then I could see, and then she's crying now. And then she sits down, the next person goes and performs. And then halfway through the next person performing, she actually gets up and then walks over to the head teacher. And I'm just about having a panic attack right now. Thinking, what the hell is going on here? And she goes and talks to her, and then sits down again. When the next person finished her performance, my daughter was then invited back up by the head teacher, and she said, Livy has asked if she could actually repeat her number. She felt she could do it better. And so she stood up there, and just the performance anxiety of that, she just stood up there and did this again. And after having been crying and upset, she absolutely nailed it. And then as we went home, she references Pakanui. And at the end of the year, when they did the whole awards for the whole year, she got a special prize for courage and role modelling to young children what it's like when something doesn't go well and that you try again and don't give up. So I know that, I'm glorifying a little bit here, but because I'm so proud of her, but I don't think they are disconnected, those two things. I think that her mindset and her sense of identity helped her, and I think that will be that's even stronger reference point she's got going forward. Okay, so I'll flip a little bit into the coaching side of what I'm doing. Now, as you all know, very accidentally got into coaching, didn't really know what the hell I was doing, but I managed to sort of somehow get parachuted into quite high-profile teams. So in the United Kingdom, one of the big football clubs is called Manchester City, and somehow I was invited to help them think about their culture and how they could improve it. And so the first morning of the first day, I sat in a small room, there's probably about 10 of us, and the owners of Manchester City also own New York City and Melbourne City. So my job was to work across all three teams and try and work out where we were culturally and then how we could improve. But a psychologist stood in front of us this is just a small room, from the English Institute of Sport, and he just said, look, first thing we need to start this project by thinking about is we have actually just done a meta-study, which we're not going to publish, and I'm not exactly sure why not, but anyway, we've done a meta-study of 1,000 studies which show that 70% of human behaviour is determined by the precise environment you're in at the time. And I wondered why I'd never been taught that at school. And that made a lot of sense. I remember being at school where I'd be in one classroom, literally here, and in another classroom in the next lesson next door. And this one with a teacher who's got this engaging smile and makes us feel warm and welcome, knows me, has spent time with me. Really, she loves the subject. She's passionate about it. She can't wait to teach us. Just that amazing feeling. I remember it. Then the bell would go. I go to the next one where we hated that teacher. He just controlled us through fear and punishment. He didn't have any passion for the subject, definitely didn't have any passion for his career. And you were just in self-preservation mode. And I used to think, there's something wrong with me here. Like, why am I not a consistent, constant type of a person? I'm sort of flipping around everywhere. I'm so sensitive. That's how I thought about myself. So that was actually incredibly empowering to have that insight. And in fact, I don't know if you get, there's a very recent British business study which showed really the same thing, isn't it? Managers have as much impact on people's mental health as their spouse. Both 69%. So just a reaffirmation of that. And because I didn't have a background in psychology, early on in my career as a performance coach, someone really helped me, and I don't know whether you'd relate to this, but a very famous coach said to me, he said, I've never really been able to get my head around psychology, if I'm being honest, performance psychology at least. I find it more useful to think about people's behaviour in terms of hormones. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I'll share something that we did, which again hasn't been published. And this is the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team, who since the 1890s have won 85% of their games. So they've got quite an incredible team. I think the most successful team in any sport across the world. But they went through this period where they weren't playing well for like a decade. And they've always been quite innovative. So they got an endocrinologist to come from Australia to spend 3 months with them. And this is pretty invasive, I'd say, compared to what we would do today. But for 3 months, basically took blood samples of everybody, athletes, staff, everyone in the environment, and then went away and analysed them, and then reported back. And as a result of that exercise, which again wasn't psychology-based, it was based around hormones, they fundamentally changed their whole team culture. So I'll give you some examples of what they found and how it's been implemented. First of all, in their performance week, they have a big meeting on a Monday where basically they review the performance of the previous week up on a big screen. And typically what they would do is highlight some positives and then highlight a few negatives. This is what teams around the world do every day. What they found is when they analysed the hormones of the athletes in particular, is their anxiety levels were so high, they were basically having a panic attack as they drove into the car park. And actually, I remember as a lawyer, I think a lot of my colleagues probably also had panic attacks as they, just in anticipation of the absolute, burden, fear, all of these things that were coming before them. And so what they explained to the coaches was that you are exhausting them. Their energy levels are being so overwhelmingly sapped, but also their learning is so diminished when they're in that state. So just from that bit of feedback, which is based on hormones, they changed that. They only ever give them feedback one-on-one now, away from the social situation, because that was the main thing that they were fearing, was being socially embarrassed in front of their teammates. They also found that the oxytocin levels were actually very low in this team, even though they represented their nation. So they brought in a Tuesday social evening that they still do 10 years on. In order to connect with each other, they all wear the clothing from their hometown, and they tell stories about where they come from, all of these type of things. It's now a tradition. So they saw the oxytocin levels increase, the cortisol, adrenaline, etc. coming down. And in that way, they just sort of found their own cultural profile based on hormones. Again, I felt it was a very, very interesting way to approach it. I'm wearing an Aura ring today. You'll find in high-performing teams everywhere, these are pretty ubiquitous, and I anticipate they'll be pretty ubiquitous everywhere. And what is getting quite interesting now is that we're starting to think about our culture in terms of our collective profile. If you see that, that's based on an individual, but that the Aura, for example, has these 4 states of stress. And what we're starting to do now in the teams that I work with is actually now mapping about how everyone is experiencing the environment. And these sort of dots, we're now working out what are they. So if we've got some real clarity that at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, there was a lot of people having a high stress thing, like, well, what happened on 3 o'clock on Tuesday? Pretty obvious, isn't it? But this is what we're doing. And what we're actually then doing is being able to give it to leaders as biometric objective feedback on, I know you think you had a sensationally good session with the team, just going to actually have a conversation. I should love you to have a look at this data and what do you make of that? What can we learn from that? So I find this is incredibly helpful. Obviously, diversity means we have people with very different stress reactions to our environments. But we are starting now to aggregate this and starting to really, really think carefully about it. And what we know is that all of us are high performers, and we're going to be in that stress state. We're human beings as well. Often we're in that high stress state before we even get out of the door in the morning. So that's okay. But if we're just going to live there in a chronic way, we're going to exhaust ourselves, and we're going to have people burning out and people who are unwell. That is not high performance. So we cannot be living in that high stress state. So these biometric things are really, really going to help us have healthier environments and more energized environments. You know, an example, if we actually tomorrow were able to do a field trip together, if I could take you all to the Boston Celtics with me, you know, what you'd probably notice is that when we go into the training facility, there'll be iPads all set up for the athletes, and they will put in some basic info around their sleep and their nutrition and hydration. But they will also be asked between 1 and 10 what their energy level is, and between 1 and 10 what their mood level is. Okay? Now this is again fairly ubiquitous in high-performing teams. And the teams I work with, we've got players, we've got 17 years data of benchmarking where their mood and their energy levels are on a day-to-day basis. So this is what happened. And I'm embarrassed that my legal experience was so different to this. In these teams, what happens is that the coaches get a printout every morning of where their players are in terms of their mood and energy. And so they're going into the first meeting or the first session with their athletes, and they know that you're normally an 8.6 mood guy and that you're a 5 today. And because you're a human being and we have all sorts of stuff going on, that's cool. I mean, that's life, isn't it? But they'll note it. The coach may go to you and say, hey, I see, you know, your mood's down today. That's cool. Hey, if you wanted to have a chat to me about anything, you know you can do that. If it's something to do with our environment, I think you should let me know. If it's personal, respect that. So these are just the most natural conversations. You know, if it's 2 or 3 days with low mood or low energy, then there will definitely be a conversation. But it's all done nice and casually and pretty organically. But then what is crazy is that all the rest of the employed people, they go straight through and sit at their desk. No one's asking them about their energy levels or mood. Well, how do we justify that? When we've got athletes who are performing in front of millions of people, we know perfectly well their well-being is critical. And also they need to know that we care about them and we're supporting them. We know all this, but yet we allow most people just to go straight to their desks and pretend that they're okay or whatever. I cannot see how that is sustainable. I don't think it's going to be. So some of the things that we double down on, and obviously I wrote a book called Belonging, so this won't be a big surprise, is one of the things we know from a hormonal point of view, from a biometric point of view, is that belonging is really, really important for people. And what we find is that people who are in any environment, and I know you know this better than me, you know, they're feeling like an outsider, they don't belong, their anxiety levels, their burnout, all of these things are not conducive to high performance. So some of the things that we would do in our environments are pretty obvious. I mean, first of all, when someone comes into our environment, we just explain to them, hey, it's so great to have you in this team, and you belong here. And this is how you make us better. And we explain that. And how often do we not do this? In the recruitment process, there were like 4 unbelievable candidates. We chose you. Why would you not tell someone that? And this is why we chose you, is because your experience, your personality, and this is how you're actually going to make us better as we work towards our mission. Why would we not do that? I remember at first being a lawyer, it was about 1.5 years before I felt like anybody really trusted me or thought I had any value to add. So we just be direct about it. Then we get them to sit with the people they're going to be working with and just everyone explain a little bit about who they are and what their role is. So it becomes very clear very quickly what everyone's doing and then how you fit into that. That really enhances people's sense of belonging rather than trying to figure it out over months and asking, you know, second parties, third parties of what other people are doing in the team. But also the way we give feedback is feedback is a critical belonging cue. Gareth Southgate, who was until recently the manager of the England football team. So I had a lovely experience of working him from day one for 5 years. And his way of giving feedback, which he hadn't learnt anywhere, was just natural, was just simply when and in that type of environment, when people aren't performing well, it's a little bit obvious. You can see it on TV and everyone's writing about it. But he would always start a feedback conversation with, look, first of all, how are you doing? How's things? And he's earned the right to ask about them and their families because he's actually been there. He's had conversations with them. He would actually go to their village and meet their families when he selected people. Not everyone does that. So he's earned the right to be able to properly have a conversation around how are you doing and how are your family, rather than just some superficial question. Then he would say that, I just want to remind you why you're in this team. This is why you're here. There's thousands of good players, but this is what we love about you. And then next thing he would say is, remember at the start of the season, before we got into the rough and tumble, you and I had a conversation around what would the next best version of you look like. Remember, and they did it, and they actually did that. He went to their house, he went to their club. They had a conversation about their growth and what the next best version of them would look like in 12 months' time. So he's anchoring all of this feedback conversation around all of that. And, we don't do it, but if you wanted to take a hormonal profile of those individuals getting feedback from him, it'd be very, very different than probably what people are traditionally used to. So belonging isn't a one-off thing we do to induct people and forget about it. Every single day, it's always up for grabs. I've got athletes who've been in a team for 15 years. One comment from a coach, which is even ambiguous or maybe negative, they can think, okay, I'm on my way out of here. They're looking to replace me. So we never take it for granted, but we are very aware that human beings need a sense of belonging to be the best version, and that every day we are taking in a lot of different cues. And we can never, ever get complacent about it. And it also is a really important part of it is we love the story of us. We love being around the campfire and hearing these stories of people before us and what they did and our ancestors and all of this. We're hardwired for that, we know that. But often what happens is that these teams, the environment itself might be reasonably healthy, but what's missing is that there is no bigger story of who the hell we are. It's missing. And human beings want, when they come into a community, into a team, they want to hear the stories about who we are, and they want it to be a bit special, and they want to feel connected to it. And I'm going to show you a film in a second, which I produced with the British Olympic team. But first of all, I just want to explain the background to it. The British Olympic team, it's been very, very successful. Not quite as successful as the US one, but it's up there. And a couple of years ago, before the Tokyo Olympics, a survey was done which found that they were the most diverse team in the United Kingdom, hooray, and the most loved brand in the United Kingdom, double hooray. And I was coaching with the leadership, and we had a small, intimate gathering of our senior Olympians, just to preview what type of environment we wanted to create for Tokyo. And one of our very respected senior woman Olympians, she's 4-time Olympian, multiple gold medal winners, she said, I saw in the newspaper how we are so diverse and so celebrated, and I think that's wonderful. I've just got a question. Who was the first woman to ever represent this team in Olympic Games? And there was stony silence. And then we'll come back to you on that. And then one of our very famous black athletes put his hand up and he just said, well, along those lines also, I've been in 3 Olympics, I've never heard of who our first black athlete to represent Team GB is. Who's that? We'll come back to you. And so what actually should have been a great meeting was horrendous, because what the sense of the athletes was is that you're very happy to take all these plaudits from the community about how diverse and great we are, but we don't even know our own story. And not only that, our leaders don't even really care. So I helped them excavate the whole story. And while I was doing it, one of a world champion athlete our British athlete, a world champion, had gone to the European Championships and done terribly, completely bombed out. And I had a chat to her, and I was like, I'd love to talk about that experience, what was it like? And she said, from the moment I arrived, I knew I didn't belong there. It's a white, dominant team. I just wanted to get out of there. I didn't care about my performance. I hated it. I was just in this awful state the whole time. And she had a particular own personal identity story, which is really, really interesting and unconventional. And there was no one in the story of that team that she'd ever been connected to help her. So what we did is we created this film, which is based on the Maori idea of whakapapa. And the athletes were able to have a look at a wider view of this team and see whether there were people they could connect with. So could we play that film? Thank you. And what was interesting about that was, I'm not sure if the leaders really understood the utility of even doing that, but these were actually, those animations were put into life size around the village. And the athletes were having selfies with them. And they weren't all going to the same person, were they? They were going to people that really they could connect with on another level in terms of their own identity story. So we are still, whatever technology's done, very, very receptive to someone just putting their arms around us and telling, you belong to a pretty cool story and there's a place for you. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the South African cricket team. So I worked with the South African cricket team for quite a period of time. Excuse the formatting at the top. Energised by learning from past traumas. So I suppose most of us here have a pretty broad view of understanding South African history. When I came in, we had a team that was democratic. There were no prohibitions on who could be in the team, but actually it was a team which was just full of cliques along obvious lines, and the team never performed to its potential. So in 2010, we really had to transform this, and we did that. And with pretty much the same group of players, we were the world #1 team for 4 years in a row, following the transformation of the culture. And one of the things that we actually did, this photo was taken when we were touring in Sri Lanka, is that a lot of the South African players now actually were born well outside the apartheid era. So they're not actually as knowledgeable about it as a New Zealander I thought they would be. So what we did one day is we felt we needed to really connect them with the whole story of this team. So along this beach near Colombo, what we did is the team had been around since the 1990s, so we did a big circle for each decade of this team. And the team started in the 1990s, as I said. But we also had a circle before the 1990s. And what we did is we literally, for a couple of hours, walked down the beach talking. But we had invited people who could speak firsthand to what was happening in those different decades. So they would come in and join that circle, and then we would move on to the next circle. And the very first circle, which is this one, is which is a decade before this team called the Proteas was formed, is that we just explained in a matter-of-fact way that up until this point, there was a black South African team, a white South African team, and an ethnic Indian South African team. They would go and play their own games. They were never allowed to play together. So you do need to understand that. That is part of our story. And that is why it is such a privilege to now have this opportunity. But also, this team should always, based on that origin story, this team should always be the best mirror for South Africa to look at and see how actually beautiful it is, of good people, diverse brothers and sisters. And that's how we framed that sense of purpose around that. So then we went through each of those decades and got all the learning, some of the glory bits and then some of the shameful bits, all of it together. But we also, I wanted to mention this as well. In 2015, we went to the World Cup and we were the favourites to win that tournament. And we started the tournament very, very well. We're beating everybody. And we got to the semi-final. The night before the semi-final was played, the South African government intervened in the selection of the team and required that an extra black player be put into the team based on political considerations. So what actually happened is the player there on the left, Kyle Abbott, he won the most valuable player in the previous game. And he had to be dropped and replaced by Vern Philander on the right, who was an awesome player, but had been injured the whole tournament, and this was going to be his first game. So the morning of this game, so we're talking about trauma, and I suppose the obvious point here is that teams suffer it just as much as individuals. And the morning of the game, the players are all together. This is like going to be one of the best days of my life, is your mindset when you come down, your favourites to win a World Cup semi-final. And the coach had to explain to the team that, okay, I'm just going to read the team out for today, which everyone assumed they knew, and the best player is dropped and replaced by a player who had been injured. The players couldn't believe it. It had a devastating effect on the team morale. It distracted, it was just a nightmare from a performance point of view. You could easily understand, just a complete nightmare. And the captain and the coach couldn't sell with conviction why this was done, but at the same time, they didn't feel they could say a politician told us to do it. So it was just a mess. They went out and actually they played with a huge amount of spirit. But in the game they should have won, they lost at the very end of the game. They lost their composure, and I think the day was too much for them. After that, everybody dispersed, and then they came back for the next season. We were world #1 ranked. Within 6 months, we were world ranked #7. The team from this experience, they just completely lost their way, and this culture that we'd built up, they thought it was probably BS that we could allow that to happen. So what we did is we got all together again, stopped training, stopped playing, and just got together as human beings in a place called Fairway in Pretoria. And we sat down and we realized we had to sit around and talk about what had happened. Not a comfortable thing to do. We had to talk about this. And so we did talk about it, and we asked both of the players, and they were actually great friends before this had happened. But from that moment on, they'd found an incredible tension in their relationship, and they just didn't feel they could connect with each other again. So we got each of them to speak about how they felt, and just walk us through the experience of all of this, because a lot of it followed the tournament as well. And it was really quite a beautiful experience to be part of in many ways. It was done in a very mature way, but everybody got their feelings out. There was some catharsis there, particularly when they hugged, and we decided to move on. We then won the next 8 games in a row. So I'm mentioning this because this all matters, and I'm a performance coach. This isn't just nice things to do. This has a profound effect on how groups of human beings operate together, is that we could not work beyond that trauma unless we did that. And I'm conscious of time, but I'll wrap up very shortly. I just wanted to mention my experience with the England football team. We came into the team the year after they lost this game. So they lost to Iceland, who are not a big football nation, in the round of 16 in the European Championships. And the team was pretty devastated by that, and Gareth Southgate was appointed. So one of the things that we did, again, that similar idea, was that in that game against Iceland they lost, they completely panicked. It was obvious. So one of the things we did, they didn't have a set of values actually at all. So it's one of the things we did is we created them. And about being original, which means just being yourself and unleashing your own special skills, being composed and being fearless. And in terms of being composed and fearless, we basically said that the version of this team that the world has seen for the last 20 years isn't composed and is very fearful. So we need to create a next version of what this team can look like to be more competitive. So we are not saying these are super strengths of ours today, they're not. But we are going to make them super strengths, these 2 values, these 2 traits. Cut a long story short, Gareth resigned this year, but in the next 4 tournaments, we hadn't made a final since 1990. In those 3 tournaments, we made the final of the European Championships twice and the World Cup semi-final. So the team did get objectively more competitive. And again, that's using some of the trauma and just an honest assessment in the past. And the final story I'll leave with you is, again, this is from the South African cricket team. We decided to bring in a belonging induction, which was that when everybody made their debut, they would come in and they would sit on a sofa with an older player, and they would just tell the story of where they come from, where they first played cricket, what it meant to other people that they were in this team. But it had one surprising effect when we first did this, because we had to get the whole team to do it originally, obviously, because it wasn't a ritual. Now, 12 years on, it's still a ritual that everyone experiences. But when we did it for the first time, what was very interesting to me was that one of our players in the team, very, very good player, people did not like this guy at all. He was quite introverted, quite moody, always sit at the back of the room, just negative. People would invite him out, let's go for a coffee, never wanted to go for coffee. And just really, really visually, physically didn't want to be here, but then on the field was like a complete gun. And so, they valued him, but they didn't like him. And what was really quite powerful was when we first did this exercise and we sat him on the sofa. He'd been in the team for 3 years. And just before he answered the first question of where he'd come from, he said, "Why is it taking anybody 3 years to ask me anything about where I come from?" I think it's pathetic. Pathetic. That it's taken 3 years to bother to make any inquiry about who the hell I am. And he said, "I know you don't like me. I don't care. I don't trust this place." I was like, and I'm one of my first experiences as a performance coach trying to facilitate this, and I'm like, absolutely. And the coaches and captain had trusted me that this is going to be amazing, and that's how we're starting. Oh my God, I need to get back to that legal desk very quickly. But He said, I'll tell you where I come from. This is where I come from. I come from a township outside Cape Town. And I was very good at sport. No spoiler alert there. But what we used to do after school in the township is we used to come and play on the streets after school. That's what we did. And it was fun. It's more fun than playing with you guys. I enjoyed that more. But then it got ruined, it got spoiled. Because when I was 12 and I'm playing on the street, these guys in our township started pulling their chairs up and watching us. And why were they doing that? And then after one of these games, one of them comes over to me and says, tomorrow when you bat, you're going to go out the very first ball, okay? That's what you're going to do. You're going out the very first ball. So he just looks at him, and then the next day they all come out of school onto the township, they're on the street and they play their game, and our guy, he just plays his normal game. He's not listening to that. He just loves playing cricket. He loves hitting the ball. Why wouldn't you? Halfway through this particular game, this person and two others come up off their chairs and grab him and physically drag him to his house. And what had been happening is the gangs were betting on these games. These 12-year-old, 11-year-old kids playing cricket, they were betting on these games. And he was supposed to go out first ball, but he didn't. And they dragged him into his house and put him on the sofa. They went to his father's workplace and grabbed him and dragged him back into the house. And they sat them all down there with guns and told them that if that boy ever disobeyed them again, they would burn their house down. So his mother said, you will never play that game again. And he didn't. It wasn't until he was 17 at high school where a physical education teacher saw him and saw this incredible talent and said, you've got to play. So the player said, if you want me to play, you have to talk to my mum. So she made a few rules, but she allowed him to play. 3 years later, he's playing international cricket. But his point was, how dare you judge me? You don't know anything about me. You treat this staying in 5-star hotels, flying business class everywhere as some frivolity. It's not. It's not. My family still feel shame at me being in this team, and I'm second-guessing every day whether I should even be here. So from that moment on, you could just see everyone lean into him. Just that human empathy came out, and he became one of the team, truly. And he felt he belonged there, and he became one of the best players in the world over the next couple of years. Just an accidental lesson, but a very powerful one. And I'm going to be really naughty. I'm just going to say one last thing. It's very naughty. Because this is a really important thing about belonging is shared values. One last ritual from that particular team I want to share with you is that we had 3 values as a team, and we actually replicated them by having a stone that represented each one, and we took them around the world with us. So people think we're crazy, going around airports with these 3 stones in a bag, but that's what our values. So before we played in competition, what we would do was put the 3 stones in front of us, and we would stand in a circle. And these 3 values, we never, ever, ever defined them. Ever. There's no PowerPoint presentation on them. There's no drop-down menu. There's no, facilitated workshop about what they mean. Never did that. This is what we did, is that we would ask each player to hold this stone and just tell us as a team what this value means to them. And I remember one of them was honesty, because I'd really struggled, not surprisingly, to really be honest with each other. There's so much tension around all that stuff. So one of the players, and actually you can see his legs here, Hashim Amla, the first ever Muslim captain of South Africa, he picks it up and he says, an honest life, honesty to me comes from the Quran, comes from the Prophet. And he explained how he interpreted that and how he tried to live his life. And then he passed it on to the next player, who was an Afrikaans player, who explained how his father had basically destroyed their childhood through dishonesty, and that he'd taken, he'd vouched that he would never be like that, but then he started to see it in himself as an 18, 19-year-old until his wife actually confronted it. And then he passed it on to the next one. So each person was given complete permission to explain what this value means to you and who an archetype of that value is. And what was really quite beautiful from a performance point of view, I remember, is the following year we lost about 3 or 4 games in a row. We weren't playing very well. We had a team meeting about what was going wrong. And Hashim Amla, the first Muslim captain, has got the biggest cricket IQ in the team. He was just quiet. And so one of the players said to him, remember last year when you held that stone of honesty and you said that this is what it means to live an honest life? He said, yeah. And you remember that you said that if there is something that's holding back the collective, that you've got to be brave and be honest and express that and not keep it within? He said, yeah. You're not doing that. So I'm going to invite you to live that honesty, that value in the way that you defined it for yourself. Like, that was pretty cool. And he gave 2 killer insights about why they were playing so badly. Then they went off and won the next 5 games. So I just want to share that with you because I think that's another level of belonging when you're actually in an environment, and rather than getting you to memorize what these values mean, you are literally being looked in the eye and given the opportunity to define it. And then that becomes a level of accountability for everybody. So anyway, I know I've gone a little bit over time, but thank you so much for...